everyone. My name is Alta Price. I'm a member of the Third Coast Translators Collective, and that's sort of what brings us together today. And we're here, this is our second of 4 events for our second annual Sant Jordi Books and Roses Festival in Chicago. I'm really grateful to City Lit Books for hosting us, and we'll be presenting today 3 books. We actually have many more, and my first interlocutor is Winifred Bird. But first I want to sort of welcome you all, and I'd like to thank, actually, I'm going to make sure I thank the Catalonian delegation and the Farragut Fund for supporting Books and Roses. We're having another event tomorrow about this, but the history of, some people are wondering, where do the roses come from, why the roses, why the books, and it basically started out almost a century ago in Catalonia as the National Booksellers Association sort of day, much like a week from today, Saturday, many of you know, is like Independent Bookstore Day in the US. So, and because the 23rd of April happens to be the feast day of St. George, the Dragon Slayer, they basically put the 2 together, and the blood that was shed by the dragon when St. George slayed the dragon, they turned into roses as part of the legend. That's my somewhat dry version. We'll get a much more evocative version tomorrow with our Catalan presenters, Bel Olid and Paul Galofre. I really want to highlight, actually, I'm so grateful to the Third Coast Translators Collective. There are many of us, but we bring work from over 15 different languages into English. So the two members that we have here today will be discussing reading from their latest work and discussing the pleasures and perils of multilingual life and labor. Winifred Bird will talk about translating Tomihiko Morimi's latest collection, Foxtails, from Yen Press. This came out in the fall,
November
of 2022, as well as other YA fiction from Japan. And our other guest, Ellen Vayner, will read from 2 works of contemporary Russian language fiction, Belarusian author Sasha Filipenko's Red Crosses, published by Europa Editions in 2021 and shortlisted for the 2022 EBRD Literature Prize, and Mikhail Shevelev's Not Russian, also from Europa, also in 2022. With a foreword by the renowned writer Lyudmila Ulitskaya. Despite originating in vastly different languages, these books all explore intense relationships with family, place, and the ghosts of the past that inhabit both. Winifred Bird is an author, environmental journalist, and Japanese to English translator. She has translated young adult fiction by, apologies for my pronunciation, Japanese is not one of my languages, Mamoru Hosoda, Makoto Shinkai, and Nishio Isin, as well as Tomihiko Morimi's short story collection Foxtails. She is the author of Eating Wild Japan, Tracking the Culture of Wild Foods with a Guide to Plants and Recipes. And we had actually a wonderful event on that when it came out. I think it was 2 years ago. It was during the pandemic. A beautifully illustrated, I forgot to check if they have it in stock here in the store, but about foraging and cooking with those foods. Her work has been recognized by awards from the Japanese Literature Publishing Project, the Wisconsin Newspaper Association, and the Society for Environmental Journalists. She lives on Washington Island with her family. So Winifred, would you like to dive in with a reading, or would you like to contextualize your work for us first?
Sure, yeah. Well, first of all, thank you, Alta, for organizing this, and thank you to the bookstore, City Lit, for hosting us. It's great to be here. So I'll just introduce the book a little bit and the reading I'm going to do from it. So Foxtails is a collection of 4 stories by Morimi. They are all set in Kyoto, as is much, I would even say most of his work. He has created this kind of his own Kyoto that is inhabited by various spirits and yokai and college students and spirits, ghosts of the past. And he has many books set in this Kyoto that he has created. So this is a collection of ghost stories. It's they're kind of all interlinked. They share elements across stories. And this is a very, to me, it's like almost like a homage to a classic horror, classic ghost and horror writing. So it's a very kind of a straightforward storytelling style. His other mode that he works in is much more fantasy, wacky, like just this crazy amalgam of kind of over-the-top, interesting images and metaphors and cliches and fantasy. So I might read a little bit from this. This is not my translation, but it's kind of fun to compare. I'll read from the first story in this book, which is called Fox Tales. That's the name of the book. And this is set at Fushimi Inari Shrine, which is in the south of Kyoto City. And it's a shrine to the god Inari, which is the harvest god, god of rice, and various other things. And Inari is said to have descended from the heavens on a white fox. So foxes are the messenger of Inari, but foxes are also like a magical creature in Japanese folklore and mythology, and that have a very complex identity and roles. So there's good fox spirits, Zenko they're called, who could help a family. And then there's bad or wild, it's actually wild fox spirits, Yako, who could create all kind of mischief. And they're kind of like a trickster figure. But foxes could also take on the form of a human, so they could transform themselves into a woman and trick a man into marrying them. And then, over time, usually be found out and made to leave. And or they could possess people. And apparently, like before the advent of modern psychology, many people who were mentally ill were thought to be possessed by foxes, and they suffered horrible beatings and things to try to exorcise the fox spirit. So also foxes are thought to have their own very complex society. Maybe some people have maybe seen the Kurosawa film Dreams, where there's the fox's wedding, which is a really beautiful little miniature film, or one of the dream stories in that film. So anyhow, very evocative of a figure that comes up again and again in this collection. So let me read this from this first story, and this is about the characters in this reading are Natsume, who is the owner of a little like antique store, curio, an antique store in Kyoto, and then her employee, the narrator of the book, who is younger. He's a college student. Okay. After Sunaga left, Natsume began cleaning the storeroom. It was full of things that had been there since her parents ran the shop that she couldn't sell and didn't know what to do with. She said she planned to get rid of them before the year's end. She told me I could take anything I wanted, but nothing she brought out was even remotely appealing to me. There were even some tubes for the centrifuge. I had never dreamed I'd see lab equipment at Horendo, which is the shop. As she was working, Natsume suddenly let out a yelp, so I peered into the storeroom after her. A papier-mâché fox mask, wrapped in yellowed newspaper, was lying on the ground. Completely caught me by surprise, Natsume said. I don't much care for that. Then do you mind if I take it? Not at all. I picked up the old mask and turned it over in my hands. It was much lighter than I'd expected and completely ordinary in every respect. Do you not like foxes? I asked. That mask reminds me of Fushimi Inari Shrine. Don't you think that's a creepy place? You're right, it's a little scary. I've been there before. Once, a long time ago, I went there with my mother, she said. We went to worship Inari, the god of foxes. I can't remember why, or why it was only the two of us. I was still quite young. My mother pulled me by the hand through that long, seemingly endless tunnel of torii gates, deeper and deeper into the woods. That fox mask was dangling from her hand. I think someone had forgotten it at the tea house on the mountain pass where we stopped to rest, and she took it. Excuse me, it was the hottest part of summer, but for some reason, when we entered Inari's forest, the air was so cool. I felt my whole body go damp, and I remember shivers running constantly down the back of my neck. No matter how far we went, there were always more rows of old moss-covered lanterns and statues of the foxes that serve as Inari's messengers. The heavy smell of burning candles seemed to penetrate my body, making me feel sick. I was so frightened, but the scariest thing of all, Natsume stared at the fox mask in my hands, was my mother's face. She was walking half a pace ahead of me, so I was looking up at her face from behind at an angle, and she had such an eerie expression, like nothing I've ever seen before, like she was angry or laughing or crying. No matter how many times I looked up at her, I couldn't make out which it was. But I knew with a horrible certainty that it was not my mother's ordinary face. I even wondered if this was not my mother at all, but instead some creature that had taken her place and planned to spirit me away into the depths of Inari's forest. She swung the fox mask in her right hand and held my hand with her left, but her long, slack fingers had no strength in them. But what if she turned around the instant I let go, staring back at me from the stone steps with a face that really was not her own, but something else entirely? Such a mistake could never be undone. That thought was what kept me walking on, my hand in hers. She laughed dryly, as if even now she was still trying to shake off this thing that had been clinging to her shoulders from childhood. Children are odd, you know. They imagine things like that, frightening themselves more and more, and then they remember them clearly as day forever after. But I wonder if I'd given in to the fear that day and shaken off my mother's hand to run away, what would her face have looked like when she turned around? I still think about it sometimes. She hugged her thin frame with both arms and stared again at the mask in my hands. The fox face stared back at her, its enigmatic expression frozen in place. So later in the story, we learn that this fox mask is maybe possessed. It was involved in her father's death and her mother's death, and so maybe it's possessed, or maybe it's just something that she uses to try to understand her family's history and these events, kind of traumatic events that took place. So that's kind of what I like about this scene is, you're never really sure, is this her fear of her mother and like seeing a side of her mother that is different and scary to her, or was she really possessed by some spirits there? And that's kind of a theme throughout the whole book is, is the world really magical and enchanted, or do we just make it that way through these stories that are told over generations?
Excellent. Thank you so much. So I have an immediate question that relates to translation, because I find that many times when we're working between two languages, I think there's a general perception, oh, you're just taking these words, the story is expressed with these words and replacing them with other words, but those of us who practice it know that it's so much more than that. And I do think that there is an ambiguity between, especially in working with this sort of text. I guess what I want to ask you, especially with, you've contextualized and sprinkled some of the, I don't want to call them untranslatables, but how much do you work with that in these stories?
And I would say I did not add a lot of the context in this book. Like in that passage, I probably added, after it said Inari, I probably added the god of foxes. That probably wasn't there. Things like that, but none of what I explained. Every Japanese reader would be familiar with that place. It's very famous, and it's this long row of these torii gates, the bright red-orange gate, kind of angular gates, and they go up for like 2 miles up this mountain, and it's a very evocative space. So the author can just reference that very lightly, as it creates an image. And I didn't add, another thing is like a lot of the eeriness comes from that kind of cultural reference.
So it's not explicit, but it's presence.
Right, like there's a number of scenes that take place on Setsubun, which is the spring equinox, and there's a festival at another shrine in Kyoto there, an exorcism festival, and none of this is explained, but in Japan, traditionally, the changing of the seasons was thought to be a time when spirits and evil spirits and fairies and things would come out and cause disease and disasters, and you would have to chase them away. So it's like setting a story on Halloween in the United States. You don't have to explain what Halloween is, but so that, I think, unfortunately, there's not a translator's note. It would have been helpful to have one for that reason. So a lot of that is not explicitly stated. Yeah.
Did you propose one, or was the publisher just,
No,
they
this
didn't wanna add
publisher,
anything?
they just don't do notes for their books. They do mostly popular fiction, genre fiction, and it's not like within their pattern that they do, I'd say.
Yeah. Which is another reason I'm so keen on doing events, is that, we get to both bring the flavor of the story, a snippet of it, but also get the surrounding details. Did you want to read more from the other, or?
Sure, I can read a little, just the first page or two. So this one was translated by Emily Ballestieri, who's a good friend and a great translator, and has been like a huge champion of Morimi's work, bringing his work into English. So this is like in his other mode, and he's actually talked about these two modes and how I would say this is like the fantasy, kind of more wacky stuff is his main style. And he said that he goes into the classic horror style as kind of like a cleansing thing for himself sometimes.
Exercises the fantasy with horror, or?
Well, just like, I think it's just more like a classic storytelling voice. The voice is very different, and that's all I can kind of make of it, is that sometimes he goes into this voice, which is much more of a straight way of telling
Narrative
stories, to kind of whatever that means as a mental hygiene is, I think, the phrase that he had used. So I'll just read like the first page of this, which is repeated 4 times because the story is replayed 4 times. It's different. It's the first 2 years of the narrator's college life, and there's different versions of it that he lives, and they each begin with kind of the same introduction. Let's just say I accomplished absolutely nothing during the 2 years leading up to the spring of my junior year in college. Every move I made in my quest to become an able participant in society, to associate wholesomely with members of the opposite sex, to devote myself to my studies, to temper my flesh, somehow missed its mark, and I ended up making all sorts of moves, as if on purpose, that need not have been made at all, to isolate myself from the opposite sex, to abandon my studies, to allow my flesh to deteriorate. How did that happen? We must ask the person responsible. And who is responsible? It's not as if I was born this way. Fresh from the womb, I was innocence incarnate, every bit as precious as the shining Prince Genji must have been in his infancy. My smile, without a hint of malice, is said to have filled the mountains and valleys of my birthplace with the radiance of love. And now what has become of me? Whenever I look in the mirror, I am swept up in a storm of anger. How the hell did you end up like this? You've come so far, and this is all you amount to? You're still young, some would say. It's never too late to change. Are you effing kidding me? They say that the soul of a child at 3 remains the same even when the man reaches 100. So what good can it do for a splendid young man of 21, nearly a quarter century old, to put on a lot of sloppy effort into transforming his character? The most he can do in attempting to force the stiffened tower of his personality to bend is to snap it right in half. I must shoulder the burden of my current self for the rest of my life. I mustn't avert my eyes from that reality. I can't look away, but it's just so hard to watch. You can tell. is like two different authors. It's pretty crazy. And part of that, I do think, is like Emily and I are also very different translators, and we have different styles. And I think these books fit each of our styles, but maybe we like accentuated the difference a little. I'm not sure.
Yeah, and you were in conversation with Emily for one of the virtual events of Century.
Yeah.
It's not online yet, right? But it's coming next week,
Yeah,
I believe?
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, but yes.
But that's interesting that, I mean, I also really enjoy the aspect of like certain translators who share authors and then others who collaborate, which we'll be talking a little bit with Ellen about that.
Yeah.
Capturing the richness of an author's voice in a source language where they really do try on, I think, Morimi in particular has these different characters that are creating characters. So.
Yeah, he's a very diverse author.
Yeah. Did you want to talk about some of the others, or are those for the reception afterward?
It's up to you. I just brought a few other things for fun. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think, was that all you wanted to read from Foxtails?
Yeah, it's really up to you. I hadn't been on the time.
Okay, we're good. I mean, I mostly wanted, because we have to re-mic, we can switch to Ellen now. I just wanted to give you a chance to read everything you wanted to read.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
That's good.
Great.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, thank you. Let's see.
Apologies for these technical little... It's so special to be back in person. Yeah, thank you, Winnie. And Ellen, if we can pick you up. I love your necklace. Shall I put it... I don't know. What's that? I could put it on the other side. Okay, great. Yeah. So, switching gears. And to let you all know that beeping is every time someone comes in or out the door.
So it's nothing to do with me.
Yeah, at first it's the charm of the space. Ellen Vayner is a Russian-born literary translator and a Russian studies professor from Cleveland. This is one other special element of TCTC, Third Coast Translators Collective. We're very much based in Chicago, but we have members currently... they are physically, literally all over the world right now. Most consider Chicago home base, but we do also encompass the broader Midwestern region. Ellen has translated, along with Brian Baer, several books published by Europa Editions. Levon Berdzhenishvili's Sacred Darkness, The Last Days of the Gulag, and Sasha Filipenko's Red Crosses, both of which were nominated for the EBRD Literature Prize in the UK. Mikhail Shevelev's Not Russian is the most recent publication. Her other works include Mother Tongue by Yevgeny Fix from Pleshka Presse, 2018, and Ainur Karim's play Chins Up, Shoulders Back, along with Slava Fabish, who is in the audience today. Thank you for coming, Slava. That won the 2022 Alta Plays and Translation Contest, Alta being the American Literary Translators Association, not me. Her latest book, Valery Panyushkin's The Hour of the Wolf, is coming out this winter. And Ellen, after you read, I actually will have you come back up, Winnie. I have a few questions for both of you. I'd like for both of you to sort of preview what you're working on now. But we'll start with some readings and contextualize your work for us.
Okay, great. I'm so excited to be here and share these books with you. The story of these books are kind of interesting. I'll tell you a few words about Sasha Filipenko. He's a young Belarusian writer who is in exile since, I believe, 2014. He actually been exiled, like Solzhenitsyn, from Russia. He was ordered to leave. And since then, first from Belarus, so he moved to St. Petersburg, and then he had to leave Russia as well. He travels through Europe right now. And his book talks about the story of a woman who survived Gulag, Soviet Union, and still found strength to keep going and live life to its fullness. Why Red Crosses? It starts with a narrator coming to his apartment door, seeing red crosses along like other doors. So while he's cleaning it, he sees a 90-year-old woman who tries to deal with her Alzheimer, putting marks to find her way. And that's how he meets that main character, Tatiana, and that's how he learns her story about survival, how she was born to well-to-do St. Petersburg family before the revolution, but when her father decided to actually come back and stay and deal with Bolsheviks, and her life path brought her to Gulag. He had shoots. She worked through the war. She worked in Foreign Affairs Ministry as a translator and a typist, and then she served time in the Gulag, while her daughter was taken to the orphanage where she perished. And after she was released from the Gulag, she found strength continue living. She actually found places her husband and her daughter were buried. She put a cross, yet another cross. Oh, and while she worked during the war in that foreign ministry of Russia, she dealt a lot with the correspondence with the organization, the Red Cross. So that's another Red Crosses in this book. And that's the last Red Cross we'll hear. It's one she put on the place where her daughter was buried. It's one, in my opinion, it's one of the most touching parts in this book. In the middle of the field stood a cross. It was narrow and human height, simple but proud, made from 2 old pipes, peeling and rust-covered. The cross appeared red. Leaning slightly but lithely pierced in the ground, this cross would vibrate with the first gust of wind and be transformed into a musical instrument. The cross sang about the past and the future, about death and desperation, about memory and humility. Not just wet, but soaked in blood from below. From this very land, the cross was its history and metaphor, a warning and a landmark. Rains watered the cross, snow covered it, the sun burned it, and the shadow it cast was not black, but a deep red. And now this shadow spread out so far across the horizon that, from time to time, people thought it was the sunset and stopped to admire it. That's one line in this book. Personal struggle, survival, and actually finding meaning in life, no matter what. Finding strength to keep going, not to commit suicide. Just keep going and try to live your life to the best. But what touched me the most in this book, it's another plot line. Exploring the polarity of modern Russian society, how not uniform Russian society is. This woman, Tatiana, she was born way before the revolution, well-educated, well brought up. By circumstances, she was brought back into the Soviet Russia and had to live with that reality. And while working during World War II, she came across lists of prisoners of war from the Red Cross organization, and she saw the name of her husband among the prisoners. Back then, being a prisoner was considered betrayal of treason, and the family of that person would be prosecuted and sent to the Gulag. So, trying to save herself and her daughter, she erased the name of her husband from that list, substituting with another name. Not an arbitrary man, no. She just took the line after, from the next line. Her husband's name was Pavkin. The second line was Pavkov, 1 letter difference. So she typed that man's name twice. No, I mean, you can't kill someone twice. So what's the difference, many would say. But she lived with this guilt for all her life. And after she found burials of her husband and daughter, she continued her search for that man, the man whom she thought she put in danger, or his family in danger. And right before she died, like actually maybe a year before she had left, she got a letter. Her search actually brought a result, and she found that man. She went to see him and saw that nothing happened. He was good and well. And she told that story to the narrator. And he buried her, put yet another cross on her grave. And then he was thinking, the narrator, who I think actually like an alter ego of Sasha, Filipenko, and one thought couldn't let him rest. And that's part I like to, I'll read a little bit. Here. Tatiana Alexeyevna, it's the main character, is no longer among us. Her apartment is waiting for a new owner. And every time I see the red cross on the door, I can't help asking, why was Pavkin allowed to go home while Tatiana Alexeyevna's husband was executed? My neighbor told me that those soldiers spent all those years together. Together they were sent from one camp to another, and together they were released in 1945. They should have also returned home together, but one soldier, for some reason, was killed, and the other was set free and decorated by the Soviets. This question gave me no rest. So, when I went to Ekaterinburg to visit my wife's grave, I asked my friend to lend me his car for the day. I drove to that little town and saw the statue of Stalin with a new, disproportionately big head. I found Pavkin's house and knocked. A few moments later, a skinny old man opened the door. Vyacheslav Viktorovich, I asked. Yes. Hello, I came from Ekaterinburg to see you. Can we talk? Sure. Why not? I enter. The house is decrepit. It's a lonely man's shack. The first thing I notice is a portrait of Stalin on the wall. I'd like to ask you one question. Well, go on. Do you remember a soldier, Alexei Pavkov, who was in captivity with you? Well, let's say I remember him, so what? What can you tell me about him? What do you want to know? Everything. What kind of soldier was he? First of all, Pavkov was never a soldier. I was the soldier. But he only planned sabotage operations. I'm sorry, I didn't put it correctly. So you remember him. And if I do, so what? Do you know how his life ended? How is it any business of mine how his life ended? We weren't friends, and still. Do you know that he was executed by firing squad? And so what? Do you really not give a damn about the man who spent so many years with you in captivity? Listen, we lived in the same barracks, but every day I did the heavy lifting, while he sat in a warm office among the crowds drawing. I worked myself to death, and that self-serving bastard would come back to the barracks and say that it all happened because of Comrade Stalin, that Comrade Stalin is as much of a monster as Hitler. In the next camp, I was again killing myself with hard work, and that sponger found another cushy job for himself. He was a loose, that's what he was. That Pavkov was a dirty trader and a rat. I see. And after you were liberated from captivity, were you in a Soviet filtration camp? Of course. Of course I was, like everyone else. But I hadn't committed any sins against the Soviet state, so they let me go right away. What do you mean they let you go? Just that. Right away, they made me an offer to collaborate, and I told them everything just like it happened, about Pavkov and about other anti-Soviets like him. Now they say there were purges, that they were all sent to the Gulag and executed, but nothing like that happened. They called me for an interrogation only once. They were very polite to me, and after I told them everything, they sent me home. The Soviet state never prosecuted honest people. And how many people went home with you? I don't know. I was released alone. The old man goes outside. I go after him. He takes a shovel, and I get into the car. The old man marches alone the snowy road for a long time. I asked if he needed a ride, but he refuses. Finally, we find ourselves on the main square. I understand that the old man has come here to shovel the snow from around the leader's monument. So it actually happened. She was like for 50 plus years, something years. She was concerned with the life of that soldier who whose name she typed twice. Not only nothing happened to his family and himself, but actually her husband died, and she was sent to the Gulag because of him actually telling all these stories to the Soviets. That's the polarity of Russia. That's Russia to you. Well, yeah, I really loved this book. It's probably one of my favorite books by far, which I translated. But then we got an offer from Europa Edition to translate Mikhail Shevelev. This book is very interesting to me in a different way. When the publisher asked us if we would be interested in this book, I was like, I looked up. Honestly, I've never heard about this author or read anything by him. Well, no surprise, because this is his first book, and he's actually a journalist. He's very well known and respected journalist in Russia. And this book was his first attempt on creative writing. But most surprisingly, we got an offer in fall 2021. So Europa Edition wanted to translate it in 2021. This book was published in 2015, and it talks about the Chechen wars, two Chechen wars Russia fought. I was kind of puzzled why suddenly, after like 7 years, anyone would want to translate something like that. But well, it was an interesting book. Of course, we agreed. And well, while we were translating it, our deadline was March of 2022, and then February 23rd happened, and I was like, how could we knew? How? And suddenly it just all became clear. Because after the war in Ukraine started, many people, like there were many talks and evidences and like articles that people predicted that war for many years, since like 2014. And closer to that event, even the exact date was actually known. Well, I don't know what's behind it, mystery or something else, but then we started to started translating this book, and after we met our deadline, it was really rushed to the press. They wanted to get it out as soon as possible, thinking it would help people to actually understand that no matter how horrible the war in Ukraine is, it's not the first crime of the modern Russia regime. It's all happened long before. Before Ukraine, there was Chechnya, the second Chechen war, the first one in '96, and then there was Crimea, and well, you can look as far as 1917 and even further. So it's not that simple. It didn't happen in one day, and just limiting our analysis of the event just to now, it kind of doesn't give the full picture. But this book is amazing. It talks about, it continues the same line that Sasha Filipenko touched, the polarity of Russian society. It's kind of difference between intelligentsia and simple Russian people. The main character, Vadik, is a simple Russian guy from a small town somewhere in the middle of Russia, who got caught up in all these Chechen wars, and then his life was destroyed by Soviet state.
Can I ask, are they set in the same time period, just to contextualize?
Basically,
Yeah.
yes. Mm-hmm. This book came out, I believe 2018. This book came out in 2015. So yeah, it's basically the same.
But the narratives, like, it's not contemporary.
Tatiana Alexeyevna lived a long life, the main character. Mm-hmm. Yes, it's like kind of goes back to pre-revolution time, then revolution itself, and then Stalin's time, the Gulag, and modern times. Main character here is much younger. He was a soldier during Chechen war, so it just goes back to that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mikhail Shevelev tries to answer kind of the same question: the responsibility of intelligentsia. How come Russia had 2 shots on democracy? No, actually 3. One was 2017 February Revolution, but most recently in 19, probably like when Perestroika started, and then in 2012. But where did it all go? So he starts. tries to answer that. And I'll read just a little bit from that. We all deserve this. We didn't earn it, but we deserve it. All of it. This president and arrogant nanny, and his nitwit vice president, and all the ministers, and all with their furtive eyes, and their scumbag deputies in this British state, in our otherworldly television, and ourselves bleating from around the corner. Everything has happened for a reason, and we deserve all of it. No, we don't. We don't deserve it. Not us. All just think again. Just to remind you, it was written in 2015, way before the Ukrainian war, way before. And then he kind of evokes all betrayals, intelligentsia, went through allowing Putin to grab power more and more power, to turn off the vent with oxygen more and more. You know, when it happens in one movement, in one act, everyone suffocates. But if it happens day by day, drop by drop, the oxygen, excess of oxygen is closing. Well, it's hard to detect that abruptly. But when it happens, and then, just a second, and then he continues talking about Russian people. So you think the Russian people are bad because they don't mourn the loss of civil liberties and don't rally for their defense? But when they were scrounging for crumbs in their factory towns, while you were shopping for houses in Chernogorия, were they good then? Of course, you were buying those houses with your hard-earned money. No one is arguing that. And I'm not talking about those who weren't just shopping around, but were already buying properties, and not in Chernogorия, but in Provence. And how did you earn all that money? Honestly, they reply. And when the corpses from Chechnya were transported by the ton and piled up in the city morgue of Rostov, wasn't it you who tried to convince the people that all this war, of course, terrible, but Yeltsin has no alternative because the cannibal Zyuganov was lurking behind him like a menacing shadow. Were you really concerned about civil liberties back then? Or were you worried about your houses in Chernogorия? Oh, you say you have been criticizing Putin, but for what? For what did he do that Yeltsin didn't do? Start a war? But what about Yeltsin, the hero of your dreams? Or did you vote for someone else in 1996? Maybe it's time to answer for this whole mess. Or is revisiting the distant past not comme il faut? 100 people gathered on Pushkin Square in Moscow when the second war in Chechnya began and Grozny was completely leveled to the ground. Only 100. Maybe we can add another 150 old people who wanted to be at the square but were too weak to go. They are the only ones who have the right to blame the Russian people. The others don't. Even those who came to their senses later and went to rally against the war in Ukraine, they don't have the right either, as you should have thought about it earlier. If you truly belong to the intellectual elite and aren't some low-life piece of trash. Should I go on? I don't want to. First, it's boring because it's pointless. Second, it's too long. This song could go on practically forever. But what is this song about? It's about the fact that there is nothing unjust, that everyone gets what they deserve. And if it seems you don't deserve this or that, just think a bit harder about why you do. And there is no we. You should forget this salvatory plural pronoun. Everyone will get what he deserves personally, not collectively. And incidentally, a crime committed by a group is punished more severely, as everyone knows. And there is no intelligentsia in the world. It's all a fantasy of Soviet theoreticians. There are intelligent individuals, but a community? Sorry, but no. Because if it did exist, the history of the last 30 years in Russia could be described in the following way. The staff of a whorehouse decided to establish self-government within their institution and implement a mechanism for electing their madam. But we couldn't agree on how to divide the profits from this new form of business. And after some hesitation, the bandits who were protecting the brothel got the situation under control. Well, I am not going to answer for someone else's fuckery. I have enough sins of my own.
Thank you. I have, of course, a lot of questions, but I notice in the, I'm grateful for the context you gave us, but can you talk a little bit about the title, Not Russian?
Oh, yes, absolutely. It's about the guy, the main character, Vadik, who actually, oh, that's not, I wanted to read the last part of this. That's one line of this book, like intelligentsia and simple people. Another is the life story of Vadik and how he decided to fight against life. When life corner you, well, what can you do? So he found a rather unorthodox way to express himself. He pronounced himself not Russian. Well, I don't want to spoil it for you.
If you want to leave it a mystery, you'll just have to buy the book.
Or I can read like little. Yeah, we can leave it as a mystery. Yeah. So when he argues with the main character, the narrator, basically the author, he said, very well, so you blame me for that? You, when it comes to like being Russian, you don't even consider me Russian. I'm Jewish. I said, but you were intelligent, so you were right and all that. But he says, okay, what about your fault, your responsibility? I said, oh, forget it. Vadik says, I am not Russian. I refuse to be Russian. Well, that's where this title comes from. Yeah. Yeah, because you know what, many of us like who were born in Russia, it's like a horrible feeling, like being ashamed of the place you were born. When the war in Ukraine started, everyone was horrified, but well, I was like, that just like it was horrible. But at least we have that leverage. Like my parents immigrated as Jewish refugees. We came here as Jewish refugees. So in Russia, we never been considered Russian because we were Jewish. Well, now I guess it's not our turn to say, well, no, we are not Russians. Forget it. Well,
thank you.
Sure.
So I'd like to open it up for audience questions, but that means I have to put the mic back on Winnie.
Oh, great.
And then if it's possible, if you guys could repeat the questions, just because the folks watching won't be able to hear the audience. Sure. Okay? Are there any questions, or is it just me? Okay. All right. So, well, I'll start with both of you. So you're both writing from obviously profoundly different languages and cultures, one being a very isolated island nation, rather monolithic, although I'm sure, you know, counterfactuals could be found for that. The kids section is very popular. Go for it. And then Russia, this massive, you know, fairly, but both had these imperial tendencies. Do you want to talk a little bit about how much you need to, I mean, one thing is that you're in service of the stories, right? How much does your familiarity with the culture influence how you bring it into English? Or maybe familiarity isn't.
Yeah, so like it's a huge question, obviously. It's interesting, yeah. I mean, people think of Japan as monolithic, but there are many Japans, and there are minorities of, Korean, Chinese communities, the Ainu in Hokkaido, the Okinawans. They were independent nations or cultures, and also, all different kinds of different ways of being Japanese. So when I was living in Japan for about 10 years, I was living in the countryside mostly. I was very interested in rural culture and farm agriculture and traditional ways of relating to nature and things like that. I had like very little engagement with popular culture like this that is hugely popular in the United States, like manga and anime and light novels and all of this stuff and these characters these that are take on a life of their own and I just never felt drawn to that. But then when I started translating, just happened to like get into kind of this pop culture translating fiction. So it was like a very different world, a very different Japan that I had to familiarize myself with. But also, like in books like this, it often draws on folklore and traditional yokai and spirits and all of that is like very deeply interwoven into the culture. So even something that seems like totally just pop and youth culture and new often is like very much based in those old stories. So I don't know if that's an answer at all.
For me, most difficult is, well, I was born in Russia, so kind of to figure out how much American readers would know certain cultural references, events. So I usually ask, my favorite is to ask my students. If they know something for sure, I said, oh, everyone would know that. Only if, like, just asking people. If they don't, well, perhaps it requires a footnote or like maybe explicitation, like kind of add a little bit more information, so it would help a reader to connect to the book, would be clear what it actually means.
I didn't realize your students played so much of a role.
Oh, not really. We love participating. Oh, actually, in Red Crosses, main character, like another character, coach in soccer, and he talks about some kind of technical terms for the life of me. I don't even know what we mean in Russian. Whatever. And one of my students was playing for a soccer team at Culture Worcester. Also, I said, hey, you won't give me hands? What on earth it means in plain English? What is it? Yeah.
The technical language,
Yeah, so, sports, I mean, I wouldn't know what it means even in Russian.
Yeah. And Ellen, I wanted to ask you about your co-translation, how you balance the work. Because
it all started with Europa Edition asked Brian if he wanted to translate Levant Berzinishvili's book, The Sacred Darkness, The Last Days of the Gulag. And Brian Beer is my former professor and advisor in thesis, master degree in translation. But this is my second career. I mean, I've been a chemistry professor before. So, well, by that time, when he got that offer, I just graduated, just finished my master's and was thinking, I fall in love with literary translation, the course that Brian taught. And, well, he offered me to collaborate, and I gladly agreed, and that's how it started. So basically, it was just godsend. And I love working with him. It's just, yeah. How we share. First book, I did the first draft, and I did most of the research. But later, it's like we translated like fourth or fifth book now. It's kind of just share whatever, and then like read, workshop.
Any questions from the audience? Okay. I'd like to ask each of you what you're working on next, what we have to look forward to.
The next book is coming in Europa Editions. It's about the Ukrainian refugees. We submitted first draft, so it should be out this winter. It's Valery Panyushkin. First title was The Hour of the Wolf. The Hour of the Wolf refers to the time when all wars are started. It's like dawn, the hour of the dawn. Sun, just when sun rises, like that wee hour, like around 4 a.m. when human mind cannot pay attention even if person has to. So it's the best time for an attack, for attacks. But it could be changed. The title could be changed to something like "We Are the Refugees," something like that. But it's like testimonies of real people, real refugees from Ukraine who escaped Ukraine, escaped the war, and now they're talking about their experience. It's heartbreaking. I was like sick when I read it. I was like in shock, literally, and translating it was like really hard emotionally. So I think it would be a great book.
Thank you.
On a lighter note, I have
Russians, it's all horror.
2 young adult books coming out that are novel versions of popular animated films. One of them is called Belle, and it's Mamoru Hosoda film that's a retelling of Beauty and the Beast in the digital virtual world, which was fun to do. I've done a couple of, he writes novel versions of his movies that he does, and he's hugely popular. And it's, he writes as if he's describing what is happening on the screen. So, you know, they're fun to read, but I feel like they maybe, they're pretty close to the films, I would say. And the other one is called Suzume. It's a film by Makoto Shinkai that came out in Japan last year. A hugely popular animated full feature, and it's coming out. I'm not sure if it's come out in the U.S. yet, but it's about a teenage girl who was a child in northeastern Japan when the tsunami hit there. So the kids, people who are kids, are now at her age, that age now. So it's very contemporary. And she lost her mother and was adopted by her aunt. And so in part it's about her relationship with her aunt and her journeying back to her town where the tsunami happened and understanding what happened. But it's also an apocalyptic fantasy where she's going around Japan on this mission to close these doors that let destructive forces into the world. These like underground worm creatures could come out through these doors. But it's super interesting. It's kind of like has an environmental message. Like people are not caring for the places that the doors open in abandoned ruins of like old villages and hot springs and stuff that were maybe built in the boom 80s, in the 80s, where this was an economic boom, and then abandoned and not just left to disintegrate and not properly cared for. And the world, the whatever spirits or Mother Earth was angry about this, and so it has a lot of interesting messages in it and cultural references, and I think, yeah, it's interesting. I think like the animated film plays a really important role in like cultural conversations in Japan right now, and a lot of like interesting ideas come out through these films. So it's fun to work on those projects.
Thank you. And I didn't realize how appropriate for Earth Day. Actually,
yes,
a lot of the books you work on are.
Yeah. I think, yeah, the environmental message in that book is like, it's somewhat like veiled, I would say, but I think it's definitely there. And it's nice because it reaches a humongous audience, you know, in a way that maybe books, more serious books may not, and young people, and just really respond to these kind of pop culture formats, and get drawn into the books, maybe see the movie and get drawn into reading the book, and so.
Great. If there are no audience questions, I want to thank you both. You can stay there, but let me steal your mic, sorry, because I want to remind. Yeah. Okay, sorry. Come on in. Yeah, we don't mean to interrupt the bookstore activities. I just want to thank you guys all again for coming and just let you know to remind you about tomorrow's events. They'll both be in Hyde Park at 10:30. There's a reading at 57th Street Books. That's the children's Sant Jory story time, Dragons and Roses with Bel Ulid and Paul Galofre. And then final event tomorrow, St. George's Day, at Seminary Co-op at 3 p.m., still in Hyde Park. Wilder Winds in the Windy City, Fum de Stampa Press, and Salt. And Jason Grunebaum from TCTC will be there to talk about South Asian Literary Translation Initiative. And one thing we didn't get a chance to talk about today, but I think is part of the work of translation is that we translate so little. We bring so little into English and into the United States. So it's really remarkable that both there are collectives and initiatives like this one to help change that and open us up to the world. So yeah, thank you again for coming. Get your books, get them signed, take a rose, and keep reading. Thank you, everyone.